This video is intended as an introduction and a bit of a tutorial on how to use the OA SMR system to generate algorithms that may help you and your organization evaluate and interpret data. The best way to do it is probably to give a hypothetical case scenario. Imagine that your clinic has decided to adopt the recommendations of a well-validated study reporting that clients with a total child risk behaviors total score on the so-called CANS survey of 6 or more should be considered at a high suicide risk and referred for consultation with a risk specialist. Those with a score between 1 and 5 should be deemed moderate risk and perhaps be scheduled for subsequent monitoring, while those with a score of 0 will be considered as low risk. Please do note, of course, that this is an entirely hypothetical situation. This does not come from any validated data. Objective Art's algorithm classification tool is an extremely useful functionality that can generate a classification for every client for whom a CANS survey, or really any survey in the system, has been entered. Let's go through the process for generating such an algorithm. Admittedly, some of the options may not make much sense for now, but bear with us and we will explain some of them as we proceed. Others will be explained in subsequent videos and/or documentation. So to begin, we have to go to the Algorithms page. To do this, we would click on Reports and Analytics, Algorithms, and then Design and Process Algorithms. This brings up a window that will show all algorithms currently existing in your system. It is, of course, entirely possible that if your system is new, you may not see any algorithms present. You may in fact notice that a suicide risk algorithm is already present. However, we will go ahead and create one from scratch for the purposes of this tutorial. So our first step is, of course, to create a new algorithm. We will click down here on the New button, which will open the following window. Under Type, we will choose Assessment Algorithm. We will discuss classification algorithm in subsequent videos or documentation. You will then choose the instrument. Now this, of course, will depend on which instruments your particular clinic or organization has subscribed to. If your goal is to generate an algorithm or a classification using results from a CANS survey, then you would choose the appropriate one, such as this version here. We are going to focus on the standard assessment. You would then give it a name, such as Suicide Risk Evaluator. And under description, you can, of course, optionally provide some kind of description, such as the one I'm showing here. At this point, you would press OK. And you will then see your new algorithm show up on the list. There it is, Suicide Risk Evaluator. Okay, so we now have the algorithm ready to go, but of course we now have to go in there and set up based on the criteria we want to use. We will therefore double-click to open up the area in which we can choose which criteria we want to use for our classification. Because earlier we selected the CANS 1.0 survey, that's what we see here, we can now click on the right-facing arrowhead to look at all the various criteria in this particular survey. Since our hypothetical study recommends using the sum of all of the values under child risk behaviors to evaluate suicide risk as a whole, we are going to click the arrow to drop down this menu, and we will now select all of these collectively. You could select one at a time, and click on Add, like so. See them appear here. Another trick is to hold down the Control button, or Mac equivalent, and click multiple ones. You can even deselect. As long as you keep the Control button held down, you can select and deselect. And now click on Add, and all of them appear together, like so. In case you are curious, notice the weight column here. This is in fact a powerful tool, as should it turn out that certain categories should be given greater emphasis or sort of greater weight in predicting suicide risk, you may choose to give a higher value for it. So for example, if a child admits or has overt considerations of suicide risk, you might include this particular one here, or give it, for example, twice the weight or 3 times the weight. In any case, we are assuming for purposes of this example that collectively all of these examples are considered to be given equal priority in terms of suicide risk. And again, this kind of decision will of course come from domain experts. Now at this point, we need to look at a couple of other options. Notice under score aggregation formula, we have a few options such as adding all the numbers together, taking the average of all the numbers together, and a couple of others that are not important for our purposes right now. These particular options here do come from current literature, which suggests that under certain situations, some of these criteria may be useful. For the moment, however, we are going to keep it simple and simply focus on calculating the sum of all of the risk behaviors. So it will simply add up all of the values that were assigned. So if suicide risk was given a 3, self-mutilation a 2, other self-harm is 0, and so on, it would simply add up all of those values together. The checkbox here labeled Include Algorithm Results when Assessments are Printed means that should you look at an individual survey, so should you bring up an individual client and then click on a specific canned survey, it will show you the results of this algorithm. It will show, in this case, the sum of all the numbers, and then the classification, whether we consider them low risk, moderate risk, or high risk. All right, we are now at a point where the OA Algorithms tool will add up all of the canned scores from these particular questions. And now we would like to take that score and classify it. If you recall, as we said earlier, the classification from our hypothetical result from a published study is that a sum of 6 or more is considered to be high suicide risk, 1 through 5 is considered to be moderate risk, and 0 is considered to be low risk. So we are going to add those 3 classifications so that when we view reports, in addition to showing the actual sum, it will also immediately tell us whether the client is considered low risk, moderate risk, or high risk. I'm going to click on Age Range Classification. You now see the new column here. I will double click in the column and say low risk. I will then add a new one that I will call moderate risk, and a third for high risk. Well, as we've said, low risk is a score of 0, so we will leave the lower bound as 0, and the higher bound we will write as 1. Now, it is important to note that in this system, the upper bound is not included. So in other words, a low risk of 1 would actually show up, would not appear in this category. Let's now go ahead and change moderate risk to the range between 1 and 5. Well, to do so, we need to write 1 to 6 here. And again, I do realize this is slightly confusing, but remember that this value here is not inclusive. So 1 is included in moderate risk, but 6 is not. Similarly, 0 is included in the low risk category, but 1 is not. So if the sum comes out to 1, then the client will be considered as moderate risk. Similarly, for high risk, we have 6. as the lower bound. And because there are 11 questions on the survey, as you can see here, each of which can have a highest score of 3, the upper bound can be 34. In other words, this will say anything between 6 and 33 is considered high risk. Anything between 1 and 5, because remember 6 is not included, is moderate risk. And a value of 0 is low risk. And at that point, we are done. Congratulations. The last step we need to do is to publish our survey. Of course, you may have saved several times throughout this process. I would typically encourage you to do that. However, until you actually publish the survey, you will not see the results on any of your reports. So we need to click on Save and Publish. And at this point, you will be returned to your main algorithms window, and you will see your new instrument present. It is possible that you may see the term not published show up, and if that is the case, sometimes you just have to wait a couple of minutes for it to process through the system. You can also try hitting this icon here to refresh the table, and as you can see, it has now been published. Now, once your algorithm has been published, you can view the results in one of two ways. The first is by creating a report, which will be detailed in an upcoming documentation and tutorial. But if you just want to see it in a if you just want to see it right away and kind of get the results, return to your client list. In this case, I would click on Measurement Tools, CANS Assessment, View Clients, and I should point out that your interface may differ slightly from mine depending on which products you have subscribed to. You would then pick a client. I double click. This shows that this particular client has 3 CANS surveys, 3 surveys. One was done on the initial assessment on this date, a scheduled update, and another one for planned discharge. So let's click on Ashley's initial assessment CANS. I double click to select the survey results. And here we are. Here are the results of all the various surveys. Here's the child risk. So Ashley was classified as a 3 for suicide risk, 0 for all of these, and 3 for delinquency, which should give a total of 6. So let's go ahead and click on Algorithm Scores. And when the report comes up, you will see all of the algorithms that were created, their resulting scores, and the classifier. And right here under Suicide Risk Evaluator, you can see that it did indeed correctly show a 6, and because 6 and above was considered high risk, that is the classifier that appears here. Feel free, of course, to go in and experiment. And there you have it. Feel free, of course, to go in and experiment by either modifying the algorithm you've just created, or go ahead and try to create another algorithm. As always, you may, of course, contact us at any time if you have questions or are in need of assistance.